Welcome, everyone. This is the International Peace Coalition, and this is the 90th meeting that we've had in a row. And I just want to congratulate everyone who has been participating with us over these last 90 weeks with this great effort and forum that we have been developing over time. I believe it's been quite successful. It's not exactly where we need to be, but it's heading in the direction where it needs to be. My name is Anastasia Battle. I'll be your moderator today, as well as Dennis Small and Dennis Speed, my co-moderators. And I just want to remind everyone that we created this forum 90 weeks ago in order to bring together the peace movement from around the world. It's been, quite frankly, dysfunctional, and people have been fighting amongst each other. And if we're actually going to accomplish true peace in the world, stop nuclear war, end genocide, then we need to come together of all ideologies, of as many nations as possible, and bring this to bear. So thank you all for joining us again to make this happen. To open us up, we have Helga Zepp-LaRouche, who is the founder of the Schiller Institute and also the initiator of the International Peace Coalition. Please go ahead, Helga.
Well, let me greet all of you. Actually, we are in an extremely exciting transformation of the strategic situation. Now, it's only 4 weeks that President Trump is in the White House, and it is fair to say that the world has been turned upside down already. Not enough, but to a very large extent. And I think the best characterization for the change is the comment in The Economist of yesterday, where basically referring to the dramatic changes, first the phone call between President Putin and President Trump, then the amazing intervention by Vice President J.D. Vance in the Munich Security Conference, where he said the biggest threat to Europe comes not from Russia or China, but from within the European Union, which has caused people to go absolutely hypertonic, ballistic, crazy, freaking out in all directions. And then naturally the very important meeting in Riyadh between Foreign Minister Lavrov and Secretary of State of Rubio and the delegations they were leading.
Sorry, Helga, for interrupting you, but your volume is very low. Toby or Dave, could we resolve this, please, before she goes any further?
Can you hear me now?
It's just very low. We can hear you clearly, but it's very
it should
soft.
be better now.
No.
It's not better? Okay, Dave, maybe you can do something. Just give me 1 minute. I'm sorry. Okay, can you hear me now? Is it better? Okay.
Much better. Thank you.
Okay. I was just saying that, the 3 events, the call between Putin and Trump, the speech by Vance in the Munich Security Conference, and then the very important meeting between Lavrov and Rubio in Riyadh, which has caused The Economist to say that this is the biggest event since the end of the Cold War. Now, that's quite a statement. And obviously, if you think about it, that when at the Second World War, you had the United States and the Soviet Union being in a coalition defeating Nazism, and then it was the infamous speech by Winston Churchill, the so-called Cold War speech in 1946, which started to shift the United States away from the alliance with the Soviet Union. And since Truman was a very weak figure, that led to the beginning of the special relationship between the United States and Great Britain, which was really the basis for lots of the so-called unipolar world, which then emerged after the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. So now the British are freaked out that this series of events is signifying such a strategic realignment. And I must really say that if you look at the commentaries, which are for hysterical for the most part, or skeptical, saying Trump doesn't really make a big difference. He's still tied to the military-industrial complex. Look at what he's doing in the Middle East, Netanyahu. So you have all these reactions ranging from the Trump derangement syndrome to looking at it as everything is completely rosy and Trump will fix it. But I think what is required is to look at this deeper axiomatic change which we see and which we have to address if we have to bring in our voices in order to bring a real solution, which has to be a new paradigm in the whole world strategic situation. Now, the Europeans, as I said, are completely freaked out because, Zelenskyy has been called a dictator by President Trump. Now they are saying that they want to go it alone, which is completely absurd because without the United States, there is no way how the Europeans on their own could maintain the war in Ukraine against Russia. Macron, for his part, is basically saying that he will visit Trump on Monday, and he's trying to profile himself as the voice of the Europeans, telling Trump that it would be a strategic error, a sign to show a sign of weakness to Putin, and that Russia will be unstoppable, that the threat Russia represents for Europe, for France, on and on like that. So Macron will be in Washington on Monday. Then a few days later, Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, will come, and he obviously will try to fix the special relationship, which is obviously not going to be easy, especially if people are clear what this is all about. And then you have basically, according to the Finnish European parliamentarian Mika Aaltola from the European People's Party, he claims that the United States has given Europe 3 weeks to either agree with the Ukraine agreement, the terms of surrender, or that the United States will pull troops out of Europe. Now, I don't think that that would be the worst thing in the world, because, if NATO would be dissolved and replaced by a real security and development architecture which takes into account the interest of every country on the planet, it would be very good. And NATO actually should have been dissolved already in 1991 when the Warsaw Pact dissolved. Now, this has also incredible effects on the cohesion of the European Union, where I'm sure we will hear what the Italian role is from Michele Geraci, but on the side of the Hungarians, they are basically not supporting further sanctions against Russia, which the European Union just agreed upon. And Hungary is also demanding documentation from the United States about the cross interference into the internal Hungarian affairs, maybe in relation to the U.S. AID, which now has been shut down. Also, the Prime Minister of Slovakia, Robert Fico, he basically said the Europeans should stop crying, about not being invited to the Riyadh meeting. And, that is not just a metaphor, that Christoph Heusgen, the head of the Munich Security Conference, was actually turning into a crybaby when he had to leave the scene. So that is extremely traumatic, and it's very clear that the Europeans have been on the tail end of the Biden administration and turning themselves into the poodle of this special relationship for so long that they cannot snap out of it easily and recognize that it would be in their best interest to have peace in Europe and not go to World War III. So that's a big task. So you have a centrifugal tendency in the EU. All these countries are actually many countries are moving more and more against Brussels, whom they regard as not representing the interest of the member states. Now, turning to the second big place of events, the Middle East, today is also a very important meeting in Riyadh, which is sponsored by Mohammed bin Salman, where basically the Egyptians and Jordanians and the Gulf Cooperation Council are meeting ahead of the big Cairo emergency meeting, the big Arab summit, which is postponed from the 27th of February to the 4th of March, to present the Egyptian originated counter to President Trump's idea to displace the Palestinians and build a Riviera on Gaza, which has been absolutely rejected by all the Arab countries, all the neighbors who find this absolutely unacceptable. Now, obviously, the big question here is, the Egyptians have offered, so much is known about their plan already, to reconstruct Gaza in 3 years more beautifully than it was before, with the Palestinians remaining living there. Now, obviously, Netanyahu must be very unhappy with it, so it's not a surprise that 3 empty buses were blown up by a bomb near Tel Aviv, the airport. And, obviously the big Damocles sword is hanging over the West Bank, where the IDF is still extremely active. So the situation is very far from being under control. And I think we have to redouble our efforts to put the Oasis plan as the solution on the table, in the hope that the Arab countries would adopt that as a further development perspective, not only for Gaza and Israel, but for the wider region. Now, we are right now having a mobilization, trying to call on people to endorse the Oasis plan to get wider and wider discussion. But in these discussions, it became also very clear that people have a real hard time to understand how the Oasis plan would work, because they say unless there is a two-state solution, there is no way how you can have economic development. And they don't understand, people who have this argument, they don't understand that this is an organizing process, where we have to organize not only every single country and force in the region, in the entire region, from India to the Mediterranean, from the Caucasus to the Gulf, because what we are talking about is not just the reconstruction of Gaza, which obviously is the central piece in all of this, but to turn a region, the Middle East, which is desert, there is nothing growing, there is no green, no agriculture, no forest, and to use the production of fresh new water, from ocean water, from aquifers, from the ionization of the air, but especially through desalinization of ocean water, and create an irrigation system connecting canals and rivers, and create new climate zones by causing more rain to follow, and basically reconquer the entire region from the desert to make it livable for all countries. And all the countries must profit from this, from Afghanistan to Iraq, to Syria, Yemen, all the countries which have been destroyed by the war. And this can be done because the Chinese have demonstrated in their desert in the northeast of China that you can transform desert into land for agriculture, forests, and so forth. And the Chinese have already said they would be capable of doing this. So therefore, the fight for Gaza as a peace option is much more than, it obviously means we have to have a two-state solution, but the Israelis will recognize, I'm sure, that it is in their absolute self-interest not to be surrounded by people who hate them and continue the cycle of violence, but to change the paradigm for good, to have a peaceful cooperation among the neighbors of Israel and Israel through joint economic development. So this is the fight, to really, take a regional issue, a local issue, but see it in the context of a much further paradigm shift where we have to catalyze all of humanity from a geopolitical confrontation where countries think that they have to have an enemy, and that all politics is a zero-sum game, into a paradigm where people understand that the one humanity must be first. And then you can define the national interest as long as it is in the affinity with the interest of all of humanity. So that is what our fight is really all about. But I think it's all the reasons to be optimistic and go into this fight with the greatest elan you can possibly master.
Thank you, Helga. And this is an incredible organizing opportunity, and things are happening very, very quickly. So our interventions that we're making here and around the world are going to have a very significant impact if we coordinate ourselves. So thank you very much, Helga. Next, I'd like to go to our next guest speaker, who is Graham Fuller. He's a former U.S. diplomat, CIA official, and Islamic scholar. And thank you so much for joining us, Graham. It's wonderful to have you. Oh, my friend, you're muted.
How about now?
There we go.
Good. Okay. Thank you, Helga, for your very pertinent remarks on this. I agree with The Economist. I don't always do so, but I do on this occasion that I think this is one of the most extraordinary geopolitical developments in a very long time. I would add, in my lifetime anyway, I think in some ways that exceeds even the fall of the Berlin Wall, which was an opportunity that sadly the West missed, but it's never too late to be able to change this. It is an astonishing change, and I'm particularly concerned at, but not surprised, at utter European astonishment and dismay. The Europeans, in my view, and I apologize if I offend any Europeans in these remarks, but I think the Europeans have been deeply dependent upon the United States in all senses. Even when the U.S. has urged that Europe should pay more for the defense of Ukraine or contribute more deeply to NATO, there has been considerable problems on the part of NATO. I think it makes Europe is almost incapable, it seems, of living without the psychological and ideological and even economic backing of the United States. You might say that it's almost been so dependent that it has lost its own ability to function independently. Washington has obviously not wanted Europe to be thinking independently for a very long time. But anyway, I sympathize with how Europeans feel about it, but it is not just Europeans. I mean, it's partly European leadership, the present leadership, which in my view is weak almost across the boards, except for Hungary, Orban. But with elections coming, particularly in Germany, but elsewhere in France, there may be new leadership, and the groundswell from public opinion, I think, may bring in some new leadership, which is more in keeping with what Trump is trying to do and what probably many Europeans who think it is possible to work for peace, what many of them also believe they want to do. Now, Helga mentioned the very important aspect that this is not this revolution, we might say, in world affairs, if indeed it comes off, and if we do see a peaceful settlement in the Ukrainian situation. This has huge implications for all of the rest of the world. And I think also, as Helga said, the Western mindset has constantly been one of a zero-sum game, going back to the end of the Cold War. And it is the Chinese. They didn't invent the term, perhaps, but it is the Chinese vision of talking about a win-win solution. I think many in the West have dismissed that as naive or a Chinese gimmick to strengthen in China's role. I don't think so at all. It represents the same kind of basic fundamental mind shift, paradigm shift that is so essential. So for starters, I think it is possible that we will now see, if there is a successful settlement to the European to the Ukrainian situation. I think the next step possible would be to see what areas of cooperation exist between Russia and the United States in other international areas. I would suggest that we might look first to the Iranian issue, simply because the Palestinian situation and the position of Israel is so strong at this point that may be a harder nut to crack, if you will. But I think there is immediate room for some work on with Iran. We have heard some hints out of the Trump administration that they are in touch. They have some contacts. The Iranians have spoken up more often. And we know that Iran itself is now moving, both Russia and Iran have had something of a rapprochement. I think certainly Russia would find it in its interest as well to bring peace to that area. Iran is an essential part of the peace plan, the Oasis plan, since it occupies a massive part of the Middle East and huge deserts in that area, so that Iran, I think, would be particularly open to the possibilities of developing its own economy, its own agriculture through the Oasis plan. And I suspect that Russia itself would be equally interested in that, because Russia faces similar problems. Central Asia faces similar problems with places like Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and others that are also very heavily desert areas. So it's the beginning of an opening there. On top of that, I think that Iran, let me say, I think one of the major problems of the stumbling blocks for the implementation of the Oasis plan, a brilliant conception going back quite some decades, from Lyndon LaRouche. One of the problems is that geopolitics has essentially blocked this, that people who are nations hostile to each other in the Middle East have not wanted to cooperate with each other. And from the American point of view, sadly, that's been just fine, because when the region is at each other's throats, the US is able to play off one group against another. And certainly fear and loathing and hatred of Iran has been an essential part of the American vision of the Middle East. So I would suggest that the Chinese have already made a major contribution to beginning to ease the situation locally through its remarkable diplomatic initiative in bringing about a rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran. I mean, for years, people in the West have all said, oh, well, we know Shiites hate Sunnis and Sunnis hate Shiites, so it can never happen. And this is in the DNA. That's nonsense. Nothing is in the DNA. Countries and nations and politicians have agency to decide we're not going to do that anymore. And obviously, China was able to bring about a rethinking on the part of both Saudi Arabia and Iran to establish a new working relationship. So if that is possible, I think already the idea that Saudi Arabia might want to block Iran's participation or vice versa, that seems now to be passé. I would think Saudi Arabia is now in a position to work with Iran. Of course, there are going to be tensions of some degree or another here or there, but they are workable if they are not turned into ideological confrontation. So if Saudi Arabia and Iran are already beginning to move towards some of the geopolitical rapprochement, then I think the chances for the implementation of the Oasis plan becomes much higher and sets an example for other intractable problems in the region, which involves virtually every single country in the Middle East. I don't want to strike any negative note at this point because I think there's so many positive notes about the game plan, the psychological game plan in Ukraine, the possibility of more American-Russian cooperation in many different areas. I would have to say, I think that the Palestinian problem is a very, very hard nut to crack, but everything has begun step by step. And if we can see some genuine progress, then I think Israel will find itself either utterly isolated or else compelled to join in what seems to be a forward movement. That's not going to be easy, but let's start maybe with Iran and Russia and the U.S. and other countries that are sympathetic to this kind of regional rapprochement in the Middle East. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham Fuller. I just want to underline something that you had said that you might find interesting. I'm here in the Dearborn, Michigan area, and there was recently an interfaith meeting of Sunnis and Shias coming together to pray for Palestine and the people of Lebanon and to stop the genocide and the war happening in South. It was very beautiful. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, some of the people who are participating in this meeting today pulled that together.
Great.
So, and he just wanted to let you know that. So yes, totally agree with you. So thank you again, Graham Fuller, for your depth of knowledge on this, on really everything that you're going through. Next, I'd like to bring in our next guest speaker, which is Michele Diraci. He's a former Undersecretary of State for Italy, and Minister of Economic Development. So thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Diraci. Oh, you're muted there, my friend.
Again, okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your kind invitation. Greetings from Italy. I was actually in Munich last week, on a cold and snowy Munich, and I had the opportunity to meet with many people who attended a security conference and try to gain a little bit more, let's say, insight than from the general public speeches that we heard. I've spoken to some Italian people here in Rome and tried to gather the reaction to Vice President Vance's speech. And I want to make a few very quick and simple points. One, I think the judgment and analysis of Vance's speech in Munich has been driven mostly by preconceived ideologies. So those who don't like Trump, they said that Vance said the wrong things. Those who liked him, instead, they said he said the right things. So we have still not moved on from supporting, like we do in a football team, to the stage of analysis and being able to be open-minded and change the views. So that's the first thing that does not make me very optimistic, that the general political scene here in Italy and in Europe seems to be divisive. No matter what he had said, they would have either condemned it or approved. That's the first point. The second point when I went deeper and trying to get some more details, I have a confirmation. And again, this could be good news or bad news. For me, is good news that the European Union is completely behind the activity that are happening in the real life. The fact that they announced the 16th package of sanctions against Russia after Putin and Trump spoke, the fact that they have reiterated the support to giving weapons and support to Ukraine until they need it, it just shows that they have not caught up with the reality. And they have not caught up with reality because they themselves fall into the trap that I mentioned in my first point, that they do not analyze, they just believe the narrative, and they go with the narrative no matter what events unfold. They just ignore them. And this could be, as I said, good or bad news, could be dangerous, but let's say the safety net that ring fences any potentially stupid reaction by the European Union is really at some point the realization that within the European Union, and now I'm going deeper to member states, they don't agree. So the meeting in Paris on Monday was a little bit of a failure with my Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, who is not a very good friend with Macron. We should remember this. And these things play a role because I've been at these meetings and personal relationship count sometimes more than big country geopolitical things. So she was capable of saying, no, we don't send soldiers to Ukraine, arguing with Starmer, who instead wanted to send soldiers to Ukraine. So even the G7 meeting, whatever it was, G something in Paris, did not go well because there are now some people who are starting to understand, including Meloni, that maybe things need to be adjusted. So this is maybe the good news, that the reality trickles down at various levels. The mood here in Italy within my, let's say, political circles, which is, let me be clear, pro-Europe and therefore anti-EU, because we believe the European Union is not doing a service to our 700 million people, to our member states, to our citizens, by doing a disservice. So we do, and I do want to really help Europe, and of course, my duty is to help the prosperity of Italian people first, and then the others, but we therefore are against the way the European Union is being handled. So we do believe that maybe this slap on the face that Vance gave to von der Leyen could be good. You know, Vance has told in Munich to the European Union, and I now simplify, he spoke to Ursula von der Leyen saying, you guys behave like autocratic regimes of the 1970s, just, you know, basically like the Soviet Union. You don't let people speak what they think. You have this Digital Service Act that tries to limit freedom of speech, hidden under this fighting disinformation thing that, of course, Vance was criticizing. Vance even said, even here in Munich, you did not invite Alliance für Deutschland because you don't like them. So you have a, you know, a member, entirely legal member of the German political party. You know, we may like it, we may not like it, but it's 20–25% of the population. And they have not been invited to the Munich conference because the chairman does not like what the people from AfD say, and same for the left-wing party. So Vance went down on the EU, not just by saying we don't like it, but giving concrete examples. Perhaps he exaggerated a little bit with the stories of, I don't know, German police entering apartment and the UK police. That these stories are always unclear because the social media, of course, is just a platform. We don't know whether there was some value to criticizing the action of the police, there was arresting people for posting the wrong things, or maybe these people did something wrong also. We don't know, but the narrative was against the European Union. And so Now the situation is the European Union went to war against Russia for no reason, because Russia didn't do anything wrong to neither Italy nor any of the EU member states, ever, really. I mean, in the last decades. Of course, Eastern European countries have their own issues from the 60s and 70s, but not in recent times. Why did we do that? To please the United States, to look good in front of the United States. And now the United States rewards EU with a tariff on made in Germany, made in Italy, made in France, and so on. So import duties. Two, you guys pay for your own defense. We're not going to help you anymore. And three, we don't invite you to the peace negotiation in Ukraine, because basically, guys, you in the European Union do not bring any value to peace negotiation, because you are warmongers. You, the US, telling the European Union that did go to war because serving the US diktat. Now they're accused of being warmongers, and so we have been left on our own, not invited to Riyadh or Astana when Putin meets Trump, and of course not to the peace negotiation, because we are perceived, the European Union and some of the member states, as people who want to derail the peace process. I stop here. I hope I gave you a kind of clear overview of the situation, which is, of course, evolving. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you very much, Mr. Geraci, for that. And I totally agree with you. I think that that's the general attitude that's going on right now. And I think the world is taking note of that. So thank you for going through it. So next, I'd like to add in Sam Petroda to the discussion. He's an Indian-American innovator, entrepreneur, and policymaker, and has been on our discussions in the past. So thank you so much for joining us, Sam. Please go ahead.
Thank you for inviting. Greetings from Chicago. It is pretty cold here. And when I say cold, I mean it is really, really cold. This is a good time to have a deeper conversation on global issues. First, I want to compliment Helga, Anastasia, Dennis Small, Dennis Speed, and all of you for this great initiative. And I know what it takes to sustain it for 90 weeks. That's really an accomplishment. I believe world is at crossroads, and it is not just about Ukraine or Gaza. There are wars going on in many other parts of the world. Look at what is going on in Africa. So I think this is a great time to focus on larger macro issues and not just micro issues and transactional opportunities. I see this today as a transactional opportunity. We're going to take one transaction, finish it, and go to another transaction. I believe world is at crossroads, partly because this is an end of colonization. Decolonization process started about 75 years ago. Then India, China, Africa didn't matter. Everyone thought that they will remain not very important because they will not grow economically. They'll have their own battles to fight, and Western world basically ignored them until China could rise. Now that China is a major power, everybody has woken up saying, wait a minute. We need to pay larger attention to demands on inclusion, on sustainability, and these issues have become very important globally. I'm not an expert, but I come from two different angles. One is Gandhian approach, partly because I come from his state, I'm a Gujarati like Gandhi. I've studied him for decades and decades. I have internalized him in many different ways. And I believe in his idea of nonviolence. I believe in his idea, and I live with it, of truth, trust, love, diversity, inclusion, human rights, basic needs. I mean, all these ideas need revisiting. I also come from the viewpoint of a technocrat who has spent 60 years in IT and telecom, mainly in the US. So I understand social media and its implications and what we are paying for it today. I understand a little bit the potential of AI and how it is going to transform our societies. And it's just around the corner. So we can't solve these problems without really worrying about what is coming in the next 5 years. Recently, I've written 2 books, one on the idea of democracy. Democracy is all about respect for other human beings. It's all about empowering people. It is about character. It is about values. It is about leaders who are not hypocrites. And I worry about democracy world over today. Then the design that we had after World War II, which gave birth to UN, World Bank, IMF, WHO, is basically obsolete. This design does not work in a hyper-connected world. And I have said it many, many times. For the first time in the human history, we are all connected. What does this connectivity mean to human civilization? Is it an opportunity for us to take human civilization to the next level? Or it is an opportunity to solve problems we are faced today, whether it's in Gaza or it's in Ukraine or whatever. So I think the focus has to be on macro issues. How do we get there? I'm glad that we have taken initiative on solving Ukraine crisis, solving Gaza crisis. My compliment to all of those who are working on the peace process. And I think it will go a long way. But we can't be happy just with that. We got to use this opportunity for much bigger vision. We got to use this opportunity not to convince people to spend more on defense, but to convince people to spend a lot less on defense and more on human development, more on education, environment, health, infrastructure. I mean, we still have poverty. We still can't eliminate hunger. I cannot imagine, with all the technology and capabilities today, why we can't eliminate hunger. I mean, every time I see on TV a picture of people in Gaza right now living in desperate conditions, and I feel sorry for all of us. So I think we need to use this opportunity, and that's why a group like this interests me a lot more. That if this 100 people or 150 people continue conversation on macro issues, of course, we have to solve the problem in Gaza. Of course, Oasis solution is a good one. Of course, Ukraine needs resolution now. And we need to build both of these areas. But I would recommend that we continue the pressure on and not be happy by solving these 2 problems. We really need a global constitution. A constitution which is rooted in peace, equality, human rights, respect, dignity, diversity, environmental initiatives, global warming, energy, education, health. I'm sure we can agree on some fundamental things. So can we really push for a larger vision coming out of this crisis is what I would be interested in. I appreciate what is going on. I want to be party to this peace process. I want to support every initiative to solve this crisis quickly, and there will be give and take. Nobody's going to be happy with everything. That's part of the negotiations which will go on. We can't make everybody happy and deliver peace. And that's where people like us come in, to talk openly about it. We have no political agenda. We don't have personal interest. We are committed to humanity. I worry a lot when I see that today people are only focused on power and profit. That's why Elon Musk gets a lot of attention, because he makes the golden rule. He has the gold to make the rule. I'm going to move that attention from power and profit to planet and people. Can we find enough people like us who are more interested in planet and people, while let others who want focus on profit and power? That will go on. But there aren't enough like us in public eyes. And there aren't enough platforms like this to talk about planet and people. And that's what we are here for. So once again, thank you, Helga, for this opportunity. And I'm glad we are here to talk about these things. And I'm sure we'll make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Sam, for everything that you've been doing and your participation and friendship in developing this process. So we greatly appreciate what you're
This
saying.
is a great group, I tell you. This is a wonderful group of people. If you had asked HR company to put this group like this together, they would probably want $10 million consulting fee.
Well, we could use, at least 1 million of that to help, build the process. That would be greatly
great group.
appreciated.
Wonderful human beings,
And after
very knowledgeable.
after the $10 million, they would then fail.
Yeah,
Exactly.
it's a wonderful group. Okay, I'm so proud of it, to be a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that was really beautiful. Thank you so much again, Sam. I wanted to ask Helga if you have a response to anything that's gone on so far.
Well, I think we have reached indeed very interesting moment in this process, which I agree is a process of complete transformation from one paradigm and one axiomatic basis of thinking to a completely new one. And, I think it's absolutely true that we are really for the first time one humanity. I've mentioned that before, but, nuclear weapons mean that either we solve our problem together or we are all dead. Pandemics have proven that, they can, with the help of airplanes, you can have a pandemic traveling around the globe in one day. Then you have the telecommunication and, Sam was referring to AI. I think that is the word digitalization and artificial intelligence are the beginning of a completely different age of what human labor means. If it's used for the wrong purposes, it can be hell. And we see right now how AI is being used for drones and other problems like that, killing machine. But I can also already see, that if you apply these new technologies for the benefit of human being, maybe even in our lifetime, that we can see that people will stop working like animals with forced labor, hard labor, and that you will go more and more to a situation where people can have lifelong learning, they can self-perfect, they can, unfold all the talents they have, which they now cannot because they have to work hard for, robots, for example, are wonderful, how much work is being done by, I don't want to take off in this, but I think that you know, we really are on the verge of a new age if we do it right, you know, and technology is always not good or bad. It's always the human being which employs the technology which makes the difference. And I think there is absolute reason for optimism, because it is that ability of man to again and again discover new technologies, new scientific insights, which improves the life of all human beings on the planet. And, you know, maybe there is other intelligent life somewhere which we may find or not. But I think there's plenty of reason to be optimistic if we can make this transformation right now. So I wanted to just say this briefly, and I think that from the standpoint of what, you know, Michele and Robert and Sam, what you were all saying, there is no question that the European Union right now is way, way, way behind the curve. And they're really, you know, like they remind me of little puppies, you know, is running behind, hop, 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 and they're just not getting there because they're not thinking straight. So I can't relieve them of that problem. You know, they have self-deserved it and they have to suffer appropriately, but we can't be pulled back by them.
Thank you for that image, Helga. That's a useful image to paint for us. Well, I want to bring in
I'm not so sure that's fair to puppies, actually, but we'll have to discuss that.
well, I want to bring in Dennis Speed, who has a question for all of the panelists that have been participating today to get this discussion going. So why don't you go ahead, Dennis?
This largely comes out of a discussion that I had yesterday with Garland Nixon. Garland had appeared with Helga on her podcast a couple days ago, and was very sort of excited and happy about that discussion. But we were talking yesterday because there was a New York Times story about how Trump wants to also make a deal with the Chinese. There are people that are worried that he's not really thinking about necessarily a military conflict, but in fact, other, quote, business deals. And obviously, we saw from the London Economist article that they were quite upset about the notion that Trump was, quote, selling out Europe because of his own, quote, business interest. This is sort of a theme. But what we were talking about was the possible role of China, which obviously played a central role in the rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and how to see what's actually happening around the Southwest Asia setting, you know, the Riyadh setting of the Trump Putin discussions, at least via their staffs, that whether or not China both is playing a greater role here, and secondly, how the relationship between the United States and China may be affected by the developments we see that are happening in the discussions between Putin and Trump. So that was the generic question that was posed. And one thing, Graham, I just want to add on to that while I'm talking about this is I'd like to have you develop more just what you're thinking about the Iran question, because it's true that if there were some way to have a peaceful, a new change in American-Iranian relations, a lot of people forget, you don't, that the United States was running Iran from 1953 to 1979, you know, and so it's, you know, there are other issues that are involved here. So I'll stop there. So whoever would like to begin. You want to start? Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Obviously, there's a lot of water has gone under the bridge. There are a lot of skeletons in the closet, as you mentioned, Dennis. I think the Cold War, of course, was the great excuse for supporting dictators everywhere around the world. Whose sole qualifications for Washington was to be anti-Russian and pro-American, anti-Soviet and pro-American. And this comes back to the issue of whether we're still in the zero-sum game anymore in the world. I fear that zero-sum thinking will not die easily, partly because it has been very advantageous to the United States itself as the sole global superpower. Anybody else who has pretenses to be a player in this is, in theory, a threat to the United States. I think the Chinese, among other things, have been very wise in avoiding any use of ideological arguments to forward China's role in the world. Indeed, they've gone out of their way, I think, to avoid that. Indeed, if I recall correctly, Deng Xiaoping, maybe 2 decades ago, had suggested that China should develop, these are my words, I don't remember his exact words, but China should develop itself quietly and unostentatiously, so as not to upset everybody else in the world, and obviously having the U.S. in mind there. I think by now enough water has gone under the bridge, if you will, in the Middle East and even around Iran, that there is a chance for more people coming together. I'm very happy to hear Anastasia talking about the Sunni and Shiite get-togethers in Michigan. I might also notice, just another way, but I live in Canada now, and it's been striking that much of the friction between French-speaking Canada, Montreal, where I live now, and the English-speaking part of Canada has somewhat diminished, ironically, with Trump's suggestion that Canada should become the 51st state of the United States. I don't think any Canadians are willing to go that way, but it has brought greater willingness of French-speaking Canadians and Anglophone Canadians to perhaps cooperate on something broader in the face of a potential threat. Anyway, I think there are just lots and lots of new issues at play here. And Iran has its own serious problems. It does have its own ideological approach, but it's now been around in the world for long enough that I think it too will be needing to look for sources of some avenues for rapprochement that will relieve the quite harsh American sanctions, but more than that, to allow Iran to play a more positive and important role in the Middle East itself. That I see as positive.
Sam, did you also have something to say? I thought I saw your hand up. I think you're muted.
Thank you. No, I would like to add to what Graham Fuller has said. I think we are at a point where we need to get off this command and control model. Today's model is command and control. I know the solution in Africa. I know the solution in Middle East. I know the solution in Europe. I know the solution in Asia Pacific. And I'm going to intervene and fix it. I think we need to really understand the power of connectivity, especially hyperconnectivity, and respect that problems can only be solved today with collaboration, cooperation, communication, and co-creation. To me, this is the fundamental issue. US will have to recognize that letting go of command and control model does not necessarily mean that you have lost everything. It does not mean that somebody is going to come in and take over your position. And let's assume worst case, even if that happens 50 or 100 years from now, what is the problem? I just don't get it. This fixation that we have to be in control. So we get involved in Chile to throw the government. We get involved in Iran. Look at how we got involved in Vietnam War. I know because I was drafted to go to Vietnam War. I didn't go. Okay, I started working on my PhD. I was young enough, and I had just gotten married. Okay, but look at what we did in Iraq, Libya. You can just go on, Afghanistan. You can go on and on and on. And when are we going to learn? At the same time, we have created intellectual capital in the world. On one hand, we have been fighting. On the other hand, we are inviting all these great brains to come to America, go to best of best universities. And you go to Mexico, every economist is from University of Chicago. You go to any other country, all the top people studied in America. I mean, look at the contradiction. We are creating intellectual capitals. These people are going back and promoting the idea of America, democracy, liberalism, equality, and all that. And then we are creating military fights. So I think unless and until there is a sensitivity in the US that power can come from networking, power does not require centralized system of command and control. You need to talk to people in Africa. You need to have a Marshall Plan for Africa to help Africa. And that will help humanity. That will help immigration. That will help local, prosperity. And everybody would be happy. And America will also get business out of it. But that's not the way people think today. It is still old mindset. We have a mindset of command and control that came out of World War II. We need a mindset of hyperconnectivity. And people don't get it. And social media and others have not done justice by promoting lies, misinformation, fear, hate. Bad elements have taken over social media. And I'm worried that bad elements might take over AI. And that's what we all should be working on. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Oh, Graham, I see you have a response. Go ahead. You're muted.
I absolutely agree with all the remarks and Sam and others. He mentioned the issue of immigration, and this is important. Obviously, we're not here to talk about immigration as such, but this is very much in the European mindset right now, is a fear of invasion of immigrants from across the ocean, and different colored peoples arriving on their doorstep, and even beginning to change some of the national character of the way of life. I mean, Germans seem to be particularly sensitive to this, but not just Germans, all across. I don't think we can sit around and simply condemn Europeans for being either racist or unwilling to see social evolution in their own states. The United States faces the same issue and obsession, if you will, with problems of immigration, even though it's been a country founded by immigrants and still is in so many ways. But obviously, the way to solve this problem is not to put up walls and to patrols and oceans and artificial means of keeping people out. The way to do forward this, to change the situation, is for serious investment, capital investment into the third world or developing world or whatever you want to call it, global South, which will cause people to stay where they are and find opportunities where they are. I think that's the only way. Otherwise, with global warming, we know that there are going to be fires. We know that there are going to be floods. We know that there is going to be starvation as a result of this around the world. So we cannot pretend that this is not going to come. It is coming, it will come, and there's no way to stop it except to convince people with powerful arguments and investment that staying in their own country is in their own interest. And certainly Europe must see it that perspective as well. European investment in the developing world, which will help immigrants want to stay where they are and work with European and American, of course, investment.
That's why I talked about a Marshall Plan for
Yes.
Africa.
Yes.
It's in our interest.
Yes.
Mr. Geraci, I wanted to see if you wanted to add anything to the discussion, to the question, or to anything that's gone on thus far.
Well, no, I concur with what has been said on the need, on the issue of migrant. The real only solution is to invest there. That's why as you know, I was one of the promoters of Italy joining the Belt and Road, because I believe no matter what China does, China is not Santa Claus. They do stuff because it's useful for them. They look after their own interest. And so they want to open up new markets for the export of their goods. They want to get investment and ownership of cobalt mines in Congo, etc., etc. Fine. And this is going to happen. So I thought that if Western countries were to participate in this China venture in Africa via the Belt and Road, we could have at least been, I don't know, monitoring, being part of it, have a seat at the table of this discussion, gain some information, and contribute with our different skills than China has, better image, better, I don't know, I was going to say right of labors, but that's always a function of the place where you work. You're not going to have German law in Zimbabwe, so people will work according to the Zimbabwean law. So the issue of right of labors is not going to be transferable across borders so easily. But at least we have an image, and China would like us to be part of it because they can do a bit of, let's say, Western washing. But what did we do? We pulled out. We were criticized. None of the Western European countries except Portugal joined the Belt and Road. France didn't. Germany didn't. And those two big countries had the financial muscle, the UK, to invest with large, not quite state-owned company, but semi-state-owned company in Germany. And so we know the problem, we know the solution, and we don't do it. And I don't know what to do to persuade people in Rome, in the government, and in Brussels, and sorry, not in Brussels, because it doesn't matter, in each of the European capitals to act and understand that the demography of Africa tell us that the population will double in the next decades. And so there's not going to be any wall that will hold migrants. Nigeria is going to go to 400 million people. Well, what do you do? The problem, I even told my Prime Minister, Salvini, with whom I'm very close, I said, Matteo, the problem is not the 50,000 that arrive next year in southern shore of Sicily. This could be a problem, let's say, the very, very tip of the iceberg that we still need to address somehow. The problem is what we do with the other 100 million that will arrive in the next 20 years. And I'll tell you, no one understands this. They do see this as something, maybe rightly so, beyond their own political career. I mean, why would Meloni care that we have a problem in 15 years' time? She will be in some UN Secretary General position and wouldn't care very much.
Thank you, Mr. Geraci. I know I see your hand raised, but I know Helga had raised her hand just before. Helga, why don't you go ahead?
Well, I'm actually quite content that the discussion seems to converge from all the participants in this dialogue on the idea that we need a Marshall Plan for Africa, a Marshall Plan for Latin America, for Asia. And, I mean, that is so obviously, in 2014, when Xi Jinping had issued the Belt and Road Initiative and made the new Silk Road the official policy of China, we immediately published all our studies, our decade-long studies in a report called The New Silk Road Becomes the World Land Bridge. And that book is still so absolutely actual, urgent, that it could be put on the table internationally now, because it is a blueprint for the infrastructure development of all continents, and all continents to be connected through bridges, through tunnels, and that way create the condition for industrial development so that poverty is being eradicated for sure. Now, the Chinese were the only ones who pursued that policy by, making the Belt and Road Initiative, by working on many different projects with Indonesia, with Laos, with Peru, with many African countries. And the Europeans generally freak out, and also the United States freak out, and they say, oh, these Chinese are doing all of these things. But the Europeans could have done the same thing in the last 70, 80 years, but they didn't. But now, I think now we are at a moment where I think that the willingness to move that additional step to join the countries from the global south who are determined to end the period of colonialism for good. And because of the rise of China, they have now a powerful ally, so that they can do what was not possible at the Bandung conference in 55, where Zhou Enlai and Nehru and Sukarno already were, demanding to end the new form of colonialism. But at that time, they lacked the strength to realize that. But now, because they have also input from India, from Japan, from, some of these countries are really taking off. Indonesia will bypass Germany as the third largest economy in a year or two. So we are not talking anymore about, total poverty everywhere. But I think what we have to really concentrate on, and I've been saying this for the whole time, a new security and development architecture which takes into account the interest of every single country on the planet. And it's not just a security architecture, it is a security and development architecture, because the new name for peace comes from development. And last week, when we had the incredible pleasure to have Dr. Pandor in our meeting, she made the absolutely important point that the OASIS plan, or the principle of the OASIS plan, of transforming undeveloped countries through energy and water and so forth into developed ones, is also the gist of the Africa plan for 2063, which is an excellent plan. And it basically also calls for the, eradicating poverty and underdevelopment, and make middle-level income countries in all the African continent. So I think what we should really come out of this meeting with is, that we really make a conscious outreach, to tell the people in the European countries, not everybody is a war hawk. You have a lot of people who are, normal human beings. You have parties who are not exactly hawkish, that we really have to move the whole thing a step further in the idea of, the United States and China should cooperate in Latin America, rather than Rubio running around and telling the Panama people they should kick out the Chinese. This is not good. We should move to the idea that we need to have a world where Americans can run their locomotives on railways which have been built by the Chinese, and that people in Europe can benefit from the advances made in India, in Bangalore, and elsewhere in the field of modern technologies, and that we move to a division of labor where we organize our world for the common good of everybody. And I think that is what I call the age of the adults, where you don't fight for your toy and you kick your neighbor in the knee, but you say, how can we organize this beautiful planet to be livable for all human beings, together. So I think that's the verge on which we are at.
You, Helga. So what I want to do, I know, Graham, your hand was raised, and I just want to make it clear because we will continue the discussion, but I want to open up, start going into the general discussion with the other peace leaders who are on the call. So Graham, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, thank you, Anastasia. Just a very quick remark, partly following along what Helga has been talking about. The Belt and Road Initiative has obviously been very much associated with China, and I think this is partly one of the reasons why the U.S. and Europe, the West in general, has been rather negative towards the idea all along, because they see it as some kind of dangerous Chinese move towards control of the world. I would suggest that the more people that join BRICS, the better. And if you will, if you want to put it in crude competitive terms, the more people that join, the more countries that join BRICS, the smaller the specific role of China will be within that group. It gets spread out much more globally. So I would even go so far as to say, I think the BRICS may be now the nascent future UN. The UN, especially the UN Security Council, I think is probably long since outlived its sell-by date. It is run by former colonial powers. Okay, that maybe made sense in 1945, but it doesn't today. So these meetings of BRICS and getting together and talking, I think, really will represent the ground basis, whether they formally think of it in these terms or not. It represents the fundamental basis for a new UN order, which I think will be far more representative and far more supportive of other global states and their interests. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. So I just want to tell everybody that we'll be going to the discussion period. We've got somewhere around 250 people on this discussion. We have folks who are watching over live stream. I don't know how many are on right now, but we often have regularly, 1,000 or so who watch it over the course of the day. So I just want to invite the people who are on YouTube or social media. Please go to schillerinstitute.com. On the top of the page, you'll see the RSVP link to get the Zoom link so you can participate in the discussion. You must be registered to have the dialogue with the participants in this, the IPC meeting. And we want to welcome people from all over the world and from many different ideologies. If you're for true peace, you are welcome in this discussion. And with that, we'll close the stream. Just let me know when we're done, Dave.